Hi guys, welcome back to Future Dimensions 360. As you know, in our last tutorial, we had learned about the middlewares in Redux store. So although we had learned almost all the synchronous method now, it's time to move forward with async methods. Until then, we had learned about all the synchronous actions. What type of synchronous action? As soon as the action was dispatched, the state is immediately updated. In our cake shop or ice creams, whenever we are dispatching any kind of state, or if you dispatch the buy cake action, the number of cakes right away decremented by 1. There is no third party involved in it. Directly we are updating the state immediately right away. Same is going on for buy ice cream action as well in our cake shop. This is good until now what we have learned as per the requirement of our application as well. But what if we have a requirement that we have to call an API? After that, once the response of an API will come, then we have to update the state in our action or reducer method. In that scenario, there is some sort of actions. Those are known as asynchronous action will appear into or will turn into our application. How we will deal with them, what will be the things going on and how we will work with them. Asynchronous mean asynchronous API call, fetch data from an endpoint and use that data in your application. So let's go forward and try to learn a bit how our application will look like, what we will be implementing in our this tutorial and coming tutorial. For example, fetch a list of user from an API endpoint and store them in a Redux store. I want you guys to implement an example with me in today's tutorial and a coming tutorial in which we will hit an API, fetch some users data, and we will set it up that data in our Redux store. How our state will look like, what will be our actions, and what will be our reducer and how our reducer will work. Before implementing it practically, let's move forward and go through one by one each and everything and understand how everything will look like. Let's say state. How state will look like. It will be for sure an object that will contain a loading as a parameter that will be true at the beginning. That loading will represent that you have to display a spinner or loading screen in your component or no. Secondly, we will have a data variable inside a state object that will keeps our user list that we will be fetching from API endpoint. And lastly, there will be an object, there will be an entry for error. That will be an empty string and it will be responsible for displaying an error to the user in case there is failure or any error in fetching data. Similarly, our actions, we will be having multiple actions. First of all, we will be having fetch users request an action that will allow us to fetch users from the API endpoint, or that will let us to start user fetching from the API endpoint. Once the fetch user will be successful, there will be, you can say this action when we will be our call to API or endpoint will be successful. And lastly, there is a failure, fetch user failure. This time when our error fetching data will be failed. Okay. So these will be our actions. Similarly, we will be having some reducer, how it look like. In reducer, we will be having first case that is fetch user request. So fetch user request, when it will become, what we have to do, we have to change the screen towards loading screen, or we can turn on the loading screen. So for that one, we have to change our loading variable value in state object to true. Rest all will stay as it is same. Second case will be our fetch request user success. Once we call the API successfully and we are having a list of users, what we have to do, we have to turn the loading screen off. So for that one, we have to pass false as loading screen and we will be passing data to users object as well. And lastly, we will be having fetch users failure case. Once the user API call will be failed, we have to still change the loading screen to false to remove that one. And then we have to change an error object or error variable to some sort of error that will be returning from the API as well. So let's move forward to our Visual Code, and we will try to implement this example in our Visual Code. How we will do that is, I'll come in our application again, what we are using before. I'll try to create a new file called async redux. Let's say async redux.js. Okay. First of all, what I have to do here is const redux equals to require. We have to import redux for us. Require, okay, and that will be redux. Secondly, what we want here is, first thing is to create a state. So let's say our const initial state will be an object that will take a loading parameter that will be true by default, and then users will be an empty array, and then last one will be an error that will be an empty string also. So now what we have to do, the first thing, the state we had created for our example that we are going to implement already, initial state. Now we have to create an actions. So let's create some constant to save our actions in it to avoid spelling mistake. What will be that? First of all, our action is, for example, fetch user. Let me copy from here so it will be easier for me. So let's say like this. This one will be our fetch user, and straight away I will copy the same one. Let's copy it 2 times more, and second will be success, success, and the last one will be failure, and we will copy this one here as well. So now what we have to do here is, we had saved our actions in constants. These actions we will be performing. Why we save them in the constant? To avoid spelling mistake. Now we have to create methods that will allow us to create an object of actions. Let's say constant. First of all, our first action will be API call, or create, I can say create fetch user request, okay, action. It will be an arrow function that will return what? That will return an object that will contain type. What will be the type? Fetch user request. Okay. Secondly, let me copy this and paste 2 times more to create 2 more action. Second one will be success fetch user request, success, and the last one will be failure fetch user request action. So in terms of success, the type of action will be success, and in terms of failure, the type of action will be failure, fetch user failure. Okay, but beside this, we will be having another key named as payload. Payload will return back what? It will return back users. So we will pass users here as parameter to this function, and we will return users here. Similarly, here we will be passing error, and we will return as payload error. So we can display that in the UI as well. So this is how our 3 action creator will look like. Create fetch user request, that will return our fetch user action as action type, fetch user request as type of object or action object, and in the second and third we will be having 2 keys in the type of in the action object, that will be type and payload. In terms of success, the payload type will be fetch user success, and users will be as payload. Users list will be as payload, you can say. And the last one, in failure, fetch user failure will be the type of the object, and payload will contain an error message that will be passed in that callback function. Let's create a reducer. Our reducer, how it will look like? Const reducer. As you guys know, reducer will take previous state. I can say previous state as a parameter. If it's empty, let's pass it as initial state, and action as parameter. It will be an arrow function in which we will be passing switch statement, and that switch statement will take action dot type as an case statement or case variable. First case will be fetch user request. So the time our user request will be fetched, what we have to return? We have to return the previous state as it is. Just we will do one thing. We will turn the loading to true. Similarly, let's copy this and paste it 2 more times. How it will look like, and let's see. In the second scenario, when our fetch request success, when we will be able to successfully fetch the users, we will turn the loading to false, and we will turn the users to what? To action dot payload, that we will be passing, because once it's success, we will be passing users as payload. And lastly, just turn the error to empty string. Well, no, we don't need error. So we are passing all 3 keys, so I believe no need to add spread operators here. Similarly, in the third time, same thing we have to do. We have to turn the loading screen to false, but in this time action.payload will contain an error, and users let it to be empty users array. This will be our reducer method. And in terms of default, let's say default will return the same state as it is, return previous state as it is. So this is how our reducer will look like. Let's say what we have to do here is we have to create our Redux store. Let's say const create store equals to, let's get hold of create store method from Redux library by saving it into a constant variable, create store, let's say like this, and here down we have to create a store, const store equals to create store, and inside it we will be passing our reducer. This is how your reducer actions and initial state will look like. Now what we have to do is we have to fetch the data from the API and pass them as parameters to our actions, or we have to create actions asynchronously. So I hope that's it for today's tutorial. I will let you to understand it in detail. Let's keep the rest to the next video. So see you soon in the next video. Please don't forget to like and subscribe our channel. See you in the next video. Take care. Goodbye.